The city had fallen quiet under a thick, soft blanket of snow. It was Christmas evening, and the usual chaotic energy of the streets had been replaced by a deep, peaceful hush. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. Fluffy white flakes continued to drift down from a dark, starless sky, muffling the sounds of the distant city and covering the grime of the sidewalks in a clean, pristine layer. From the windows of brownstones and apartment buildings, a warm, golden light spilled out onto the snow, painting cozy pictures of families gathered around trees of laughter and feasting. A world of warmth and connection that felt a million miles away from the empty, cold streets. A lone figure moved through this silent landscape, his boots making a soft, rhythmic crunch on the fresh snow. He was a tall man, dressed simply in a dark, heavy wool coat and a plain beanie hat pulled down low over his ears. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, not just for warmth, but as if he were trying to hold on to the simple, solitary feeling of the walk. He wasn't heading anywhere in particular. There was no party, no glamorous event waiting for him. On this night of all nights, he had chosen the company of the quiet city over the noise of a crowded room. He found a strange comfort in the emptiness, a sense of peace in the contrast between his own life, which was so often a public performance, and this private, anonymous moment. He was just a man walking on a snowy night, and for a little while, that was more than enough. From the deep shadows of a narrow alleyway between two brick buildings, another figure watched the man walk by. It was a dog, though its shape was barely recognizable under a thick, tangled mat of fur that was caked with dirt and ice. It was a creature of the shadows, a survivor who had known more hardship than kindness. Every rib was visible beneath its matted coat, and a constant, violent shiver racked its small body, a combination of biting cold and the hunger that had become a dull, constant ache in its belly. It had been on its own for a long time, scrounging for scraps, sleeping in doorways, and learning that humans were a source of both danger and, very rarely, a miracle. Its eyes, which were surprisingly intelligent and full of a weary sadness, followed the lone human with a flicker of desperate hope. The dog's world had shrunk to the size of its next meal and the search for a place to escape the brutal wind. The festive spirit in the air was just another smell, another confusing signal in a world that had become overwhelmingly hostile. It had learned to be invisible, to slink along the edges of things, to never draw attention to itself. But the hunger was a powerful force, a gnawing emptiness that pushed it beyond its fear. It saw the man walking alone, not making any sudden moves. There was no leash, no other dog, no angry shouts, just a quiet, steady presence moving through the snow. For the first time in a long time, a tiny spark of instinct, a primal gamble, flickered within the dog. Maybe this one was different. The man, lost in his thoughts, almost missed it. A slight movement in the corner of his eye, a shape that didn't quite belong to the stillness of the night. He stopped walking, his breath coming out in a white cloud in the frigid air. He turned his head slowly, his gaze settling on the alley opening. There, barely visible in the gloom, was the dog. He could see it was in rough shape, even from a distance. He didn't feel pity, not right away. It was more of a quiet recognition, a sense of seeing another soul out in the cold, just like him. He knew that sudden movements would only scare it away. So he just stood there, a silent statue in the falling snow, and waited. The dog froze, its muscles tensing, ready to bolt back into the safety of the darkness. It had been seen. This was the moment it usually turned and ran, its heart pounding with the memory of kicked stones and angry yells. But the man didn't move. He didn't shout or wave his arms. He just stood there, watching. The dog's mind was a whirlwind of fear and need. The cold was seeping into its bones, and the hunger was a physical pain. It took a hesitant step forward, its paw sinking into the soft snow. It stopped, its body low to the ground, its tail tucked tightly between its legs. It was testing the air, searching for any sign of threat. Seeing the dog take a step, the man remained perfectly still. He understood this quiet conversation. He knew it wasn't about him. It was about the dog's world, a world built on fear and survival. He softened his own gaze, trying to project an air of calm, of harmlessness. He didn't smile, knowing that baring teeth, even in a friendly way, could be seen as a threat. He simply became a part of the landscape, a tree, a lamppost, something non-threatening that the dog could safely approach. The snow continued to fall around them, landing on the man's shoulders and the dog's matted back, creating a tiny, sparkling world that contained only the two of them. Another few steps. The dog was out of the alley now, fully exposed on the sidewalk. It stopped again about 10 feet away. Its whole body was trembling, but its eyes were locked on the man. It was a look of pure, unfiltered desperation. There was no aggression in it, just a profound plea. It was a silent question asked with every fiber of its being. Are you the one who will hurt me, or are you the one who will help me? The man felt the weight of that question, the immense responsibility of being the only living thing in this dog's world at that moment. He slowly, very slowly, shifted his weight, making himself seem even smaller, less intimidating. The small gesture seemed to be the final sign the dog needed. It closed the remaining distance, its steps slow and deliberate as if walking on thin ice. It didn't run or bound forward. It crept until it was just a few feet from the man's boots. It stopped there, not daring to come any closer. It didn't whine or bark or paw at his legs. It simply stood there, shivering violently in the cold, and looked up at him. In that quiet, snowy moment, under the distant glow of a street lamp, the famous actor and the nameless stray just looked at each other, two lonely souls finding an unexpected connection on a silent Christmas night. The world around them disappeared, and all that was left was the space between them, a space filled with unspoken understanding and the quiet hope of a new beginning. The man remained perfectly still, a dark statue against the white canvas of the sidewalk. The scuffling sound had stopped, and now there was only the quiet patter of snow falling and the distant, muffled hum of the city that seemed to be sleeping. His gaze was fixed on the small, hesitant creature standing at the edge of the alley's shadows. He could see it more clearly now, and the sight sent a quiet ache through his chest. It wasn't just thin. It was a skeleton wrapped in a dirty, matted coat with patches of fur missing to reveal raw, pink skin. One of its ears was torn, and it held it at a strange angle, as if it had been broken long ago and had healed imperfectly. This wasn't a dog that had been lost for a few days. This was a dog that had been lost for a long, long time. For the dog, the world had shrunk to this single moment. Every nerve ending was on fire, screaming at it to run, to dive back into the familiar darkness of the alley where it had survived for so long. Its heart hammered against its ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. But there was another feeling too, a pull that was just as strong as the fear. It was the hunger, a deep, hollow fire that had burned in its belly for so long it had become a part of its existence. And then there was the man himself. He was still. So still, humans were never still. They were loud, they moved, suddenly, they pointed, they shouted. This one just stood there, his breath pluming in the cold air, his presence as calm and unthreatening as the snowflakes that landed on his coat. The dog's mind, a simple machine built for survival, couldn't process this. It was a puzzle it didn't know how to solve. The man understood this conflict. He could see it in the tense line of the dog's body, in the way its tail was tucked so tightly it was almost invisible. He knew that any sudden move, any sound, would shatter this fragile moment and send the dog scurrying back into the shadows. He had to show, not tell. He had to communicate with his body, the only language the dog would truly understand. Making a decision, he began to move, but he did it with an exaggerated slowness, a deliberate grace that was meant to be as non-threatening as possible. He bent his knees, lowering his center of gravity inch by inch. The snow crunched softly under his boots, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. He continued down until he was crouching on the balls of his feet, his knees bent, bringing himself closer to the dog's level. He was no longer a tall, imposing figure. He was just a man sitting in the snow. The dog watched this strange transformation with wide, wary eyes. The human was getting smaller. This was a new and confusing development. It had learned that big things were dangerous and small things were less so. A crouching human was an anomaly. It didn't shout. It didn't lunge. It just shrank. The dog's body was still trembling, but the frantic edge of its fear began to soften, replaced by a deep, cautious curiosity. It took a hesitant step forward, then another, its paws sinking into the cold, wet snow. Each step was a test, a question asked to the quiet, crouching figure. The man didn't answer with words. He answered with his stillness. He didn't even blink very often, just holding the dog's gaze with a soft, open expression that held no judgment, no demand, no threat. He waited. He had all the time in the world. The quiet walk he had planned was forgotten. The peace he had been seeking had found him in this unexpected, intense moment. He focused on his breathing, keeping it slow and even, trying to project a sense of absolute calm. He could see the dog's nose twitching, tasting the air, trying to catch his scent. He wondered what he smelled like to the dog. Not like food, not like a threat. Maybe just like cold wool and clean skin. He hoped that was enough. He watched as the dog took another few steps, closing the distance between them. Now he could see the details that broke his heart, the intelligent, exhausted eyes. The gentle way it flinched at a distant car horn, the raw, red patches on its legs, where the fur had been worn away from constant walking on rough pavement. The dog was only a few feet away now. It could smell the man more clearly, a clean, neutral scent that was unlike the sharp, angry smells it associated with most humans. It could see the man's face, see the softness in his eyes. There was no hardness there, no impatience. The man was just waiting. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the dog felt a flicker of something other than fear or hunger. It was a tiny, fragile spark of hope. This human was different. This human was quiet. This human was waiting. Taking a final, shuddering breath, the dog closed the last bit of distance, stopping just an arm's length away. It didn't dare come closer, not yet. It just stood there, its body a tight coil of tension and exhaustion, and looked up at the crouching man, and in that moment they connected. It wasn't a grand or dramatic thing. It was a quiet, profound meeting of two souls in the middle of a deserted, snow-covered street. The man looked into the dog's eyes and saw a whole story of hardship, a silent tale of survival and loneliness that mirrored his own feelings of isolation in a world that often felt too loud and too demanding. He saw a creature that had given up on being helped but was still desperately hoping for a kind hand. The dog looked into the man's eyes and saw no pity, no condescension. It saw a calm, steady presence. It saw a reflection of its own stillness, a shared understanding of what it felt like to be alone in the world. For a long minute, neither of them moved. The snow fell around them, dusting their shoulders and heads, as if the universe itself was trying to bless this small, quiet miracle. The man didn't need to speak, and the dog didn't need to whine. In the silent space between them, a promise was made. The promise of a warm meal, a safe place to sleep, and an end to the loneliness. The unlikely connection was forged, not with words, but with a shared, unspoken gaze in the heart of a silent Christmas night. The silent connection held in the cold air, a fragile thread of trust stretched between the man and the dog. But stillness couldn't last forever. The hunger was a real, physical thing, and the man knew he had to do something. He could see the dog's exhaustion, the way its legs trembled not just from cold, but from a profound lack of strength. He knew that just sitting here, while a beautiful moment, wasn't going to solve the problem. The dog needed more than just quiet understanding. It needed fuel. Very slowly, so as not to break the spell, he began to move his right hand. The dog's eyes darted to the movement, and its whole body tensed, a coiled spring ready to bolt. The man froze, his hand halfway out of his pocket. He waited, letting the dog get used to the idea of movement again. He could almost hear the dog's frantic thoughts, a whirlwind of instinct, screaming danger, danger, danger. He kept his breathing slow and steady, a silent rhythm in the snowy night. After a long moment, he continued the motion. His hand emerging from the deep pocket of his wool coat, in his palm, was a simple, foil-wrapped protein bar. It was half-eaten, something he grabbed earlier in the day, intending to finish it on his walk. It now seemed like an inadequate offering, a ridiculously small solution to such a massive problem, but it was all he had. He held it in his open palm, not moving it towards the dog, just letting it sit there, a strange, shiny object in the dim light. The dog's nose twitched, its eyes fixed on the bar. It didn't know what it was, but it could smell something. A faint, promising scent that cut through the smell of snow and city grime. With his free hand, the man began to carefully, quietly, peel back the foil wrapper. The crinkling sound was sharp and loud in the silence, and the dog flinched, taking a half step back. The man stopped again, his patience endless. He was learning the rhythm of this interaction, a delicate dance of action and reaction. He waited until the dog relaxed, just a fraction, before continuing. He tore off a small piece of the dense, chewy bar. It was a simple act, but he performed it with the focus and precision of a bomb disposal expert. He held the small piece of food between his thumb and forefinger. He didn't reach out. That would be too much too soon. Instead, he gently tossed the piece of food onto the clean snow in the space between them. It landed with a soft thud. The dog's head snapped down, its eyes wide. It looked at the morsel on the ground, then back at the man, as if asking for permission. The man gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the encouragement the dog needed. It darted forward, snatched the piece of food from the snow, and retreated back to its original spot, devouring it in a single gulp. It was so fast, the man almost wasn't sure it had happened. He watched the dog, a feeling of deep sadness washing over him. The way it ate told him everything he needed to know about its life. There was no savoring, no enjoyment. It was pure, desperate fueling. It was the action of a creature that had no idea when its next meal might come. He broke off another piece, a little bigger this time, and tossed it. The dog was a little quicker this time, a little less fearful. It ate, and then its eyes were back on him, locked onto his hand, waiting. The man continued this way, piece by piece, until the entire bar was gone. It was a small meal, barely a mouthful for a healthy dog, but for this one, it was a feast. But when the last piece was gone, the dog's hope didn't fade. Its eyes were still fixed on him, the desperate plea still there. The protein bar had been a spark, but it hadn't put out the fire of its hunger. The man looked at the dog, really looked at it. He saw the matted fur, the raw skin, the exhaustion in its posture. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't go back to his quiet, solitary apartment and leave this creature to fend for itself in the cold. Not on Christmas night. Not any night. His eyes scanned the street, looking for an answer. And then he saw it. A block down, the bright, friendly glow of a 24-hour market sign. A beacon in the darkness. It was an ordinary, everyday sight, but right now it felt like a sign from the universe. A solution. He knew what he had to do. But there was a problem. He had to leave. He had to break this connection, walk away, and trust that the dog would still be here when he got back. It was a huge risk. The dog had survived by running, by not trusting. Why would it trust him now? He looked down at the dog, which was now sitting, its body still tense but its gaze unwavering. He had to try. He slowly stood up, his knees cracking in the cold. The dog's head tilted up, watching him, a flicker of its old fear returning in its eyes. The man looked at the dog, then at the store, and then back at the dog. He had to communicate his intention. He knelt down one last time so they were eye to eye. He spoke, his voice soft and low, a gentle rumble that was meant to be reassuring, not commanding. "Wait here," he said, the words forming a small white cloud in the air. "I'll be right back." He didn't know if the dog understood the words, but he hoped it understood the tone. A promise. He stood up again, turned, and began walking towards the market. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder. The dog was still sitting there, a small, lonely statue in the middle of the sidewalk. It watched him go, its head cocked, its ears perked. It didn't run. It just waited. The man felt a surge of something he couldn't quite name, a mix of relief and responsibility. This was no longer just a chance encounter. This was a commitment. The inside of the market was a stark contrast to the quiet, snowy world outside. The air was warm and filled with the hum of refrigerators and the faint, cheerful sound of a radio playing Christmas carols. A lone cashier looked up from a magazine, gave a bored nod, and went back to reading. The man walked with a new sense of purpose, his boots dripping melted snow onto the linoleum floor. He bypassed the aisles of chips and candy, heading straight for the back. He found a small section with pet supplies. He grabbed a few cans of wet dog food, the kind with chunks of meat and gravy that would be easy to eat and provide much-needed moisture. He grabbed a small bag of dry kibble, too, for later. On his way to the checkout, he grabbed a bottle of water at the counter. The cashier barely looked at him, just scanned the items and announced the total. The man paid, his mind already back outside on the small waiting figure. He took the plastic bag, the cans clinking softly together, and pushed the door open, stepping back out into the cold. His heart gave a little lurch of anxiety. Would it still be there? He looked down the street, and there it was, right where he had left it. The dog had not moved an inch. It had waited. It had trusted him. And in that moment, the man knew that this simple act of buying a few cans of food was just the beginning. This was the first real step on a new path for both of them. The plastic bag rustled softly, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent street. The dog's ears perked up, its eyes fixed on the bag and the man holding it. It didn't move, but its whole body was vibrating with a tense anticipation. The man knelt down again, the snow soaking into the knees of his pants, but he didn't seem to notice or care. His focus was entirely on the small, fragile creature in front of him. He placed the bag on the ground and carefully pulled out one of the cans of wet food. The metal was cold to the touch. He used his keys to puncture the lid, the sound sharp and clear in the quiet night. The dog's nose twitched wildly as a rich, meaty scent filled the air. A smell it hadn't encountered in a very long time. If ever, he looked around for something to use as a bowl. His eyes landed on the flat, metal top of a nearby trash can. It wasn't ideal, but it was clean enough from the fresh snow. He brushed the snow off with his gloved hand and then, using the edge of the can's lid, he emptied the chunky, gravy-laden food onto the metal surface. It landed with a soft, wet plop. He pushed the makeshift bowl gently across the snow towards the dog. For a second, the dog just stared at it as if it couldn't believe its eyes. Then, with a hesitancy that was heartbreaking, it took a step forward, sniffed the offering, and finally its hunger won out. It lowered its head and began to eat. The man watched, his heart aching in his chest. The dog didn't chew. It just gulped. It ate with a frantic, desperate energy, its whole body focused on the single task of getting as much food into its belly as fast as possible. There was no joy in the eating, only a primal, urgent need. It was the sound of pure survival. The man could see its sides heaving, its little body working overtime. He stayed perfectly still, not wanting to interrupt this first real meal the dog had likely had in weeks. He opened the second can and emptied it onto the lid once the first was gone. The dog ate that one just as quickly, its tail giving a tiny, almost imperceptible wag for the first time. When the food was gone, the dog licked the metal surface clean, its rough tongue scraping against the cold metal. It then looked up at the man, a new light in its eyes. The desperation was still there, but it was now mixed with something else. Gratitude. It was a clear, unmistakable look of thanks. The man felt a lump form in his throat. He reached into the bag and pulled out the bottle of water. He didn't have a bowl, so he did the only thing he could think of. He unscrewed the cap and poured a small amount of water into the cupped palm of his hand. He held his hand out, a small, shimmering pool of water in the dim light. The dog looked at his hand, then at his face. It was a much more intimate gesture than offering food on a lid. It required a much greater degree of trust. The man held his breath. After a moment of hesitation, the dog stepped forward and began to lap the water from his hand. Its tongue was rough and warm against his cold skin. It was a strange and wonderful sensation, a direct connection between them. The dog drank carefully, its gentle lapping a stark contrast to the frantic way it had eaten the food. The man poured more water into his hand, and the dog drank again, until its thirst was quenched. As the dog drank, the man took the opportunity to look at it more closely. He could see now that one of its front paws was swollen and tender. It had been favoring it slightly when it walked. The matted fur was not just dirty. It was hiding who knows what kinds of burrs, tangles, and even injuries. He could see the dullness in its coat, the cloudiness in one of its eyes that might indicate an infection. The food and water had given the dog a small boost of energy, but it had also illuminated the full, desperate scope of its problems. A full belly was a wonderful start, but it wasn't a solution. It was a bandage on a deep, festering wound, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he couldn't just leave the dog here. He couldn't just go home to his warm, safe apartment and sleep soundly knowing this creature was out here, sick and injured. The simple act of kindness had morphed into something much bigger. It was no longer just about feeding a stray. It was about saving a life. His own plans for the evening felt trivial and selfish now. The quiet ride home, the solitary night with a book, it all seemed meaningless in the face of this immediate, tangible suffering. He made a decision. It wasn't a difficult one, but it was a definitive one. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out his phone. The bright screen lit up his face, casting a blue glow in the darkness. The dog watched him, its head cocked with curiosity. He ignored the notifications and the missed calls, his fingers moving with a clear purpose. He found the number for the car service he used and canceled his ride. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was the official cancellation of his old plans, the quiet closing of one door and the opening of another next. He opened his web browser and typed in the search bar, 24-hour emergency animal hospital. The results popped up, a list of addresses and phone numbers. He found the closest one only a few blocks away. He looked at the map, memorizing the route. He put his phone away, his mind now made up, his path clear. He looked down at the dog, which was now sitting calmly, watching him with those intelligent, trusting eyes. It had no idea what was coming next. It only knew that this human had provided food and water and had not hurt it. That was the extent of its world right now. Now came the hardest part. He had to pick it up. He had to bridge the final gap between them. He moved slowly, talking to the dog in a soft, low voice, a steady stream of gentle nonsense words. "All right, little one," he murmured. "Time to get you some real help." He reached out his hands, not grabbing, but offering. The dog tensed for a second, its old instincts flaring up. The man paused, letting the dog get used to his touch. He gently stroked its back, his fingers moving carefully over the matted fur. The dog flinched, but didn't pull away. He slid one arm under its chest and the other under its hind legs. He lifted. The dog was shockingly light, a fragile bundle of bones and matted fur. It weighed almost nothing. For a second it stiffened in his arms, a wave of panic washing over it. But the man held it securely, tucking it close to his chest, shielding it from the cold wind. He could feel its heart beating rapidly against him. He spoke to it again, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "It's okay," he said. "I've got you. You're safe now." And slowly, miraculously, the dog began to relax. It didn't go limp, but the frantic tension in its body began to subside. It rested its head on his shoulder, a gesture of complete and utter surrender. He stood up, the dog held securely in his arms. He turned and started walking, not in the direction of his home, but in the opposite direction, towards the bright, hopeful beacon of the emergency vet. The snow continued to fall, dusting his hair and the dog's back. He pulled the dog a little tighter, wrapping one side of his coat around it to share his body heat. He was no longer a solitary figure walking through a silent city. He was a guardian, a protector, a friend. He had gone out seeking peace and quiet and had found a purpose. And as he walked into the night, the small, warm weight in his arms felt like the most important thing in the world. The walk to the emergency animal hospital was a world away from the quiet, solitary stroll he had begun just an hour ago. The city was still hushed, the snow still falling, but everything felt different. The weight in his arms was small but significant, a fragile, living responsibility that changed the entire landscape of the night. He could feel the dog's gentle breathing, the slow rise and fall of its side against his chest. Every now and then the dog would shift, a soft sigh escaping its lips, a sound that seemed to carry all the exhaustion of its hard life. The man pulled his coat tighter around them both, creating a small, warm pocket of safety against the biting wind. He wasn't just carrying a dog. He was carrying a story, a silent testament to survival, and he was determined to give it a happy ending. For the dog, this was a completely new experience. The world looked different from up here. The scary, looming shapes of buildings and trash cans were now below. The ground, which had been a constant source of cold and pain, was far away. It was nestled against a source of incredible warmth, and it could feel the steady, reassuring beat of a human heart. The man's voice was a low, gentle rumble in its ear, a constant stream of soft, meaningless words that somehow meant everything. It could smell the clean scent of the man's wool coat, a smell that was already becoming associated with food and safety. For the first time in a very long time, it wasn't scared. It was tired, it was sore, but the deep, gnawing fear that had been its constant companion had finally receded. Replaced by a drowsy, bewildered sense of peace, the bright, neon sign of the animal hospital finally appeared around a corner, a beacon of hope in the dark. The man pushed open the door, stepping from the quiet, cold street into a world of sterile light and anxious energy. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, the faint, unmistakable scent of many animals. A cat in a carrier hissed softly from a corner, and a dog with a bandaged paw whined from across the room. It was a place of sickness and worry, but to the man it was a place of healing. He walked up to the reception desk, the dog still held securely in his arms. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, looked up. "We have an emergency," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I found this dog on the street. It's starving and it looks like it's been injured." The receptionist's expression softened with sympathy as she looked at the matted, frail creature in his arms. She handed him a clipboard with some forms. As he took it, she did a slight double take, her eyes widening for just a second as she recognized his face. But she was a professional. She simply said, "Okay, we'll get you in as soon as we can. The vet will be with you shortly. You can have a seat in the waiting room." The man found a quiet corner and sat down, adjusting the dog in his lap so it could rest more comfortably. He didn't fill out the forms right away. Instead, he just sat there, stroking the dog's matted fur, feeling the tremors that still ran through its body. He wasn't thinking about his own life, his work, or anything that had occupied his mind just an hour before. His entire world had shrunk to this small, suffering creature in his arms. He was just a man, waiting and hoping, like any other pet owner in that room. A few minutes later, a veterinarian in a white coat called his name. He followed her into a small examination room. The room was bright and clean, with a steel examination table in the center. He gently placed the dog on the table, keeping one hand on its back to reassure it. The dog immediately tensed, its old fears returning in this strange, new environment. The man leaned down and spoke softly to it, his hand a steady, calming presence. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're here to help you." The vet, a woman with a gentle, no-nonsense demeanor, began her examination. She was thorough and kind. As she worked, she spoke in a low voice, explaining what she was seeing. "He's severely undernourished, as you can see. He's covered in fleas, and this ear," she gently peered inside, "is badly infected. That's why he's holding it at that angle. And this front paw is swollen and bruised, probably from a fall or from being kicked." Each word was a small hammer blow to the man's heart. He had seen the dog's rough state, but hearing the specific list of injuries made it all so much more real and tragic. He thought of the dog, alone and in pain, navigating the cold, hostile city, and a wave of fierce protectiveness washed over him. The vet looked at him, her eyes full of compassion. "He's a fighter, that's for sure. He's also incredibly sweet, considering what he's been through. We'll need to run some tests, clean him up, treat the infection, and get him started on some high-nutrient food. It's going to be a long road, but there's no reason he can't make a full recovery." The man looked at the dog, which was now looking up at him with those same trusting eyes. "Do whatever you need to do," he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "Whatever it takes." The vet nodded, and a vet tech came in to take the dog for its tests. The dog whimpered softly as it was led away, looking back at the man. He felt a pang of separation, but he knew it was for the best. He spent the next hour in the waiting room, finally filling out the paperwork. When the receptionist told him the total cost, he didn't even blink. He simply pulled out his card, paid the bill, and asked when he could pick the dog up. He didn't do it for show or for thanks. He did it because it was the right thing to do. It was a simple transaction, but it felt like the most important thing he had ever done. A few weeks later, a picture quietly appeared on the internet. It wasn't posted by a news outlet or a celebrity gossip site. It was shared by a veterinary technician who had been moved by what she had seen. The photo was not a professional, glossy shot. It was a candid picture taken on a phone. It showed the man sitting on the floor of the clinic's recovery room. He was leaning against a wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him. And on his chest, fast asleep, was a dog. But it wasn't the same skeletal, matted creature from that snowy night. This dog had a shiny, clean coat. Its ribs were no longer visible, and its eyes were bright and clear. One of its ears was still a little floppy from the old injury, but it looked healthy and happy. The man's hand was resting on the dog's back, and even in the still photo, you could feel the connection between them. The photo went viral. Not because of who the man was, but because of what it represented. It was a story of quiet, steadfast commitment. The unbelievable reaction wasn't just that he had stopped to help a stray. It was that he had seen it through. He had paid for the care, visited the dog during its recovery, and, as the photo later revealed, had decided to give it a permanent home. He had named the dog Buddy, a simple, perfect name for a friend found on a lonely Christmas night. The story became a symbol of hope and kindness, a reminder that compassion can change a life. It wasn't about a grand, public gesture. It was about a private choice to care, a choice that turned a chance encounter on a silent, snowy street into a lifelong friendship, proving that sometimes the most profound reactions are the quietest ones.